Hey everybody, welcome to Not Another Tooling podcast with myself, Austin Pearson, and my co-host, Mr. Matt Malcolm. How are you today, Matt?
I'm good, man. It's good to get back on the treadmill. That was no joke. Yeah, feel good. Feel good. Feel very focused for the next year.
Nice. For those of you who are watching this at a later date, it is January the 4th today, is it?
Fifth.
Something like that. It's still one of those times where you're not really quite sure what day it is. But anyway, New Year, exciting stuff. So today we are going to talk about running a successful software trial, we'll call it, or you might call it a POC or a POV, and we'll probably start there. And the reason we want to talk about this is because so many customers have trialed software, gone, yeah, that does what we need, and then once they've implemented it, it's not quite right, and they never really see the value out of it, and it ends up either not going into production at all and being a failed project, or if it does go into production 2 or 3 years later, it's out the door and being replaced by something else. And this typically starts at the POC or POV stage, I think. So the first question is proof of concept or proof of value. And I think this is probably a really important stage to start the discussion, because I'd say where people typically have gone wrong, in my experience, is they run a proof of concept. That proof of concept is very technically focused. Technically, can we do X, Y, Z? Can this widget connect to that widget and show this data in this dashboard, blah, 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 blah? Can it monitor Azure and this thing and that thing and all that sort of thing? Versus a proof of value, which is trying to prove out the value that you've established that your organization needs in order to get what you need from the software, i.e. some business benefits out of the software versus technical benefits. Is that a vaguely accurate description, Matt?
Yeah, yeah. As you're sort of going through, then I still think there's a place for POCs versus POVs. Think about it from an OBS perspective. POC, I think, is very transparent. It is what it is. Does it widget work? Does it click? Does it drop? Does it whatever else? And I feel like the smooth running of a POC is definitely more successful than trying to manufacture a POV. Granted, the same activity is largely taking place, but that dotted line activity between the thing and the perceived value, it just turns into bullshit a lot of the time. So it's a fine line. So I still think there's a place for POCs, but the caveat is, and the observation, the more mature organizations, I think, are good to go and run at a POC because they've already done the business benefit. They're looking at a capability thing, and they know already, really, they should do. That's how it's been planned. Versus maybe the less mature organization who hasn't worked at that bit yet, the POV does have a place, but you've got to deal with that fluff and manufacturing of data, which happens in all value-based activities, especially when it's a sale cycle. Yeah. My observation as a buyer, not as a seller.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I just feel that it's pretty rare that actually you walk into a customer and they are ready to do a proof of concept because they understand the value. And I think that was sort of our next point is before you engage in a POC or POV, you really need to understand what you're trying to achieve, because that technical list has got to relate to the value that you're getting. Okay, so proving out those technical capabilities that's going to allow you to get the value you want. So I kind of think of this as, do you have enough to go to your CFO and say, we would like to invest in this tool because it is going to benefit the organization in this way, this way, and this way, and these are the returns you're going to get. If you're at that stage and you can clearly articulate that, then you're ready to get into the technical bits of a POC. But it's very rarely the case, right? Normally it's the case of, we've got a gap in our observability matrix and we've decided that we need to go to market to get a widget to look at Kubernetes in this particular instance, blah, 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 and it needs to integrate with this and blah, blah, blah. And you just get a huge list of technical points. And you go, okay, well, how is your organization going to be better after putting this in? And they go, oh, well, we'll be able to see more stuff. And you go, okay, what does that mean?
You know what, there's another caveat. Definitely agree. We'll talk about that business value linking in a second. But where am I going with this? The scenarios where I think it would be really fine just to have a list of blah, blah, blah stuff, like widgets, buttons, whatever else, and it to be closer towards POC territory versus POV territory, is if the capability already exists in the organization and you're looking for a product swap. If you're looking for a product swap, you know the thing's achieved already. You're doing the stuff, you're pressing the widget, but it's just done in a different way, or whatever it might be. The thing is already being delivered. So there's less of a reason to prove out the value if you're delivering the capability. What you need to make sure is that other products can actually do the same thing. The cost of the product can then be added to your overall value business case, of course, but you don't need to implement the sort of minutiae detail of POV, which generally gets drawn out. So there's a good scenario, which is like, that happens a lot. If you're looking at just a product swap, you can go at it more techie.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here. There is a time for that, and I think, like, if your vendor is about to go bankrupt or they've decided they're not investing in the product anymore or something like that, then absolutely, and you just need to fill that gap. However, if you're going, okay, we've had our monitoring tool for 20 years and now we need a better one, you still need to define what the value is. Why?
I'm not talking about a better one necessarily. So the bigger driver, yeah, cool. So the most obvious driver is a better financial position. It's costing less, cost reduction. What was it looking at last year? 7%, 11% reductions for most organizations. Okay. So you need to reduce your position, but you still need the capability. You know what the capability is. So your driver isn't to go and get a better product. That might happen by default. Fantastic, great. But you're looking to replace a functionality for something which is more cost effective. So that's sort of, let's go backwards and forwards. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do see what you're saying. However, I think you could do that in maybe a tool reduction or tool consolidation. Sorry, was the better word, kind of play. If you've got 17 monitoring tools and actually you could get away with 2 or 3, then there's a really good place then for swapping stuff out. But there's also an opportunity to do things better than what you do today as well. But I'd question whether swapping one tool out for another one for cost reduction actually ever happens. If you even, if you I don't know, just let's say you had a network monitoring tool and you were swapping out for another network monitoring tool that was way cheaper. By the time you've done the analysis, you've done the POC, you've bought the software, you've implemented it, you've trained people, blah, 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 blah. It's very rarely much. Yeah, on paper, your licenses might cost you a bit less, but in reality, the cost of change outweighs that.
Okay, I got one further rebuttal for that.
Good.
Is if there's significant enough cost difference between product A and product B, you can absolutely realize those benefits. Like where you're talking about just the reduce of a license cost, like, yeah, the transformational cost itself, the knowledge transfer, the implementation, all those things are going to be significantly weighting against the overall return on investment, of course. But if the gap is so significant, we're talking half, a third, a quarter of the price in some cases. When you look at those strong, the gap is now between premium and mid-market products. Can you still do it? Then the business case, even if you fucked it up, it's still going to be looking positive.
Mm.
And that's different. So when we was hands-on doing stuff, that's different. When we was doing stuff before, the gaps probably weren't as big and the product selection wasn't as big. But because the mid-market's so strong in most capabilities now, that gap can be big and it can be functionally viable as well. So I think it's just different from when we was actively doing it, when we was actively selling the stuff and implementing the stuff, to now there's much more selection and quality as well, versus just a handful of vendors.
Yeah, yeah. I think I see where you're at with some particular places. So ITSM tools, for example, everybody bought the big tool in the marketplace and they don't really need it half of the time. So you could save some significant money by doing that. I agree. Although you've got to be wary that it is a big project. And it's probably not the tool that is the issue, why you're not getting value out of it. And you could probably do a load of things to reduce the cost of what you're spending with that particular vendor as well. But also the maybe the one that came to mind, and I know we never really mentioned vendors, but is kind of like the move from Splunk to Elastic. Is definitely cost reduction.
Yeah, but the running costs and the effort costs to get what you need that you would have got from Splunk, from like, I mean, there's a line there and I don't know where it falls. Depends how many use cases, how complex you were. So yeah, Splunk's, but there's way other options than Splunk. If you needed to do something different than Splunk, there's a handful of them, you know, that could be doing as well of a job. Even some of our APM vendors, I know we're talking about vendors normally, even let's say, maybe a bad example because it's quite an expensive product anyway, Dynatrace as an example. Even they're beginning to delve into the space of data analytics, and with their, I forget the component name, but like there's lots of options. So that example there, I've seen that, I've experienced it, and the other way around as well. And it doesn't work out because you have to have 5 people to do 2 people's job because it's so complex. So it's different. Some organizations run them in parallel. But yeah, I get where you're going.
Right, we've got way left
man.
there, everyone. So before you do a proof of value or proof of concept, make sure you really understand the outcomes that you're going to get, if that's saving money or some improvements or whatever. And then once you really understand the outcomes that you're trying to drive from that proof of concept or proof of value, another thing I've seen that really helps is getting the right people involved.
I was just going to say people. I literally had it in my mind, people. At all stages as well, at all stages, because the scenario you were talking about earlier where you go for the POC, POV, it's all good, rubber stamp, all great, it's implemented, and it just goes to tank. It's because the wrong people, or rather the right people, haven't been involved at those early stages. It's this new thing you've just shoved down their throat rather than them being involved in that, whatever that vendor engagement was early on. So yeah, people is definitely on my mind.
Yeah, so I'd say typically we see architects involved in this kind of gathering of what do we need, what's out there in the marketplace, let's run a proof of concept, yada yada. And the people who are actually going to operate the tool don't get involved, and that's when they, like you say, get it thrown over the fence to them after it's been purchased, and a lot of the time after it's been implemented as well, and saying, here you go, now you've got this. And that's when it all falls apart, because they're like, hang on a minute, I've used this tool for years and I know this one and I don't like this one, and blah blah blah, and it doesn't work for me with what I need to do on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And maybe one step further, or maybe a quick story. So where I saw that kind of issue take place the most is when I used to be quite heavily involved in bid cycles, and the bid team will dress up this great answer and it would all be cool, and then they'd win the bid, and then it would go into the guys to implement it and operate it, and it just, like, they weren't involved. What is this new product? How are we going to do? We can't run it like this. So that's like an obvious example on a large scale. But just from a POV, POC point of view, the architects, people who design it, yeah, they're a given. They're normally people going to search the market and do all the analysis. The people that are going to use it operationally, like the admin, all those kind of folks, yes, they often get left out. It's a good one. Take it one step further though, and look at the consuming side of it.
Yeah.
Because everything is so heavily driven around user experience. And a problem with a lot of the tools and a lot of organizations is like lack of awareness, lack of usage. That's probably the fundamental issue with a lot of organizations. You've got great stuff, it's just not used as well or as broadly as it could be. So include the users and consumers or proportion of them in the activity, because you're going to get the right answers at the early stage then. And if you do go through to contractual conversations, implementation, you've got the user base or parts thereof having a voice. So that's like a very valuable component.
I think that's particularly pertinent in the ITSM space, right? That's
more so.
I think, crazy. But also the consumers of the data that comes out of this as well, right? So who are often people who are involved in the budgeting decisions and process as well, right? So towards the end of your POC, you should be demonstrating to these people, this is how we're going to be better, and this is what you're going to get that's different, and things like that. And then it makes the sign off so much easier. Or they can go, that's not what I wanted. Crikey. Back to the drawing board.
User engagement, makes a massive difference, because they're involved right at the start. Let's be real as well. It's functionally the right thing to do because you want to get the right awareness and people hands on. But like hearts and minds as well makes a big difference if people feel like they've been involved through the whole process versus just there you go. So there's loads of pros to making sure people are engaged. Some people try and avoid it sometimes because the extra noise it could generate at different stages, and you quite don't want that. But it's better to have the noise at this end versus that end when it goes to goes at the wall.
Yeah, 100%. When you're 9 months in and you just present them their new dashboard and they go, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay, right. A couple of smaller technical things before we wrap up. First one is deciding the scope of your POC, and that is, I think, in fact, this is my only one. I think is in 3 things: is put a time limit on it and be pretty strict on the time limit. POCs that run for months and months and months are just absolutely sap of everybody's energy. Typically recommend, it might be different in ITSM, but certainly in monitoring, analytics, that sort of thing, 2 weeks. If you can't stand it up and show the value you need in 2 weeks, then it's too big. It's going to be too hard. Might be a little bit longer in ITSM, would you say?
It depends. If it's a focus use case for a certain module capability, it might be okay. Or if the people receiving it are in a competent and ready state, again, it's okay to be shorter. But it depends what you're trying to achieve, really. There's a POC, POV conversation, which could be longer. Or it could just be pure product trial. You need to just understand. So, generally, yes, longer. But if you're in a ready and focused state, it could be shorter. But you're probably in the sort of 2 to 4 week period would be logical. If it's not just a single module or capability.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd also say you should be doing a POC with your preferred vendor, right? Every vendor can demo as much. Everyone's got the capability to do great demos these days. You can go talk to their other customers and reference stories and whatever. Ideally, you don't want to be running 3 POCs side by side.
No, but it depends on the scale of it as well. Like if you're in a multi-million-pound decision, then okay, and you've got the time, you're going to make the time. You're planning this over several months, okay, fine. But we haven't said, I'm not sure if you're going to touch on it or not, like through this POC, POV activity, most products are going to do most things. Most of the time, probably. I'm sure. Here or there, right? But if it says on the tin, probably going to do it, probably can do what you need to do. The extra learning I'd be looking at through that POV phase is, can I work with this vendor? Are they all right? Are they just giving me BS? Is it the right? What kind of response am I getting here? How did they do that? How are they with my users? So I'm looking at the softer aspect of that engagement. Just look at the relationship side, because that's, the product could always change. We said this on other podcasts. The product could always change. could get better, worse, or whatever else, get more expensive, cheaper. But the people and the culture, certainly mid, large organization, doesn't really change drastically. So if you don't have the right culture fit to begin with, that's could be like a warning sign to, move on to the next one.
And that should be one of your success criteria. Alongside the outcomes that we talked about earlier, is there a good cultural fit between the two companies, and are we going to be successful together? That doesn't necessarily mean you have to run multiple POCs, but if you ran one POC with your preferred venue and you just didn't get on with the people and couldn't see the fit, then out the door.
Yeah.
It's definitely tough. The other couple of things I was just going to chuck in there is just getting the technical scope right early on and not expanding that scope during POC, because that's let's just do this, let's just add this in, let's just do this. It's dead simple. Like you say, most tools can do some stuff. Pick the things that are key to you, I don't know, 3 or 4 technologies or processes or whatever that you want to see, and stick to that, and be clear about that. It makes life much easier.
Let me just add to that then. Drive it from customer side versus vendor side. Like, know what you want to have and you want to see, versus vendor turn up and go, look at all these features which demo really well or don't, or what. Like, drive it the other way around. But that involves you being competent enough to understand what capabilities and functionality you need to be. So there's going to be an overlap, because some vendors might have things that you haven't seen. But for the best part, drive that list of things that's going to take place from customer side versus asking the vendor to give you the list, because you're just being a spiral of not the right journey, I think, going down that route.
Yeah, I'd agree. And then there's a whole debate lastly on where you do that POC, so prod versus non-prod, which I'm always a big fan of doing it in production if you can, because it's actual real life stuff, and it's really easy then to compare it to your existing tool sets that you've got, or see if it's actually going to make a difference. In non-prod, yeah, I get it, it's a lot safer, and there are environments where you can't get away with putting it in production, for sure, and you have to do it in non-prod. But if you're going to do it in non-prod, then really think about whether you can use some dummy data that was live data from before, so you can simulate
it can stimulate it as well,
yeah, type real scenarios.
Yeah.
Pretend scenarios are just like, oh, that's great, blah 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 blah. But if you had a F5 outage, try and simulate that in your non-prod and see what happens and what would be different this time to how it went last time in whatever tool you.
I agree, and that's almost all capabilities as well. So if it can't be in production, it's got to be as production-like as possible. And some people's non-production environments are like super accurate, but not all the same environment factors take place.
Yeah.
But as production-like as possible. I agree. The idea of spinning up a little VM and putting it in there so people can press buttons and stuff, you're just POC territory then. Functionally, you can see it works.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can production set it, whatever that means for your organization, you've got a better chance of seeing the degree of value it can deliver. And that could just be data. You could be grabbing production data and dumping it into this thing. Yeah. That's cool. That's fine. Especially for analytical tools, event management, things like that. That's fine. But yeah, try and production set it.
Wonderful. Right. We've talked a lot today. So we've talked about running a successful POC or POV. So firstly, we talked about, do you need a POC or a POV? Depends on the scenario. If you're replacing like for like for cost saving reasons, then a POC might do the trick for you. Or if you're very, very switched on and you already know the value and you've worked that out down to technical capabilities, you might get to POC. But I think most people need a POV. And then understanding the outcomes versus the technical requirements. So make sure that you could explain to your CFO the value that your organization is going to get before you start the POC, and that's what you should be trying to, sorry, POV, and that's what you should be trying to prove out in the POV versus just a list of technical outcomes, unless, like we said, you're super mature and a POC will work for you. Get the right people involved. So not just the architects team, but the people who are going to use the tool in production on a day-to-day basis, and the people that are going to consume that tool, and the senior stakeholders as well. Get them involved early. And then finally, two weeks for something technical, 2 to 4 weeks maybe for an ITSM tool, time limit for a POC. Try and do it in production if you can versus non-production, if at all possible, and make a real difference. And understand your scope and limit it from your side, the customer side, not the vendor side, and keep to that scope. I think that was it.
Good stuff, that is. Yeah.
Wonderful. Right. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. If you've got any other tips or tricks about running a successful POC or POV, please drop them in the comments. And if you would like to suggest a topic for a future episode, or maybe even appear yourself on one of our lives, then please drop us a message or leave us a comment, and we would love to hear from you. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next episode. Take care.
Yeah.